air was thick with the scent of popcorn, cotton candy, and the faint metallic tang of machinery running late into the night. Laughter and screams of excitement echoed through the sprawling amusement park, blending into a symphony of chaos. Neon lights flickered, casting eerie shadows that stretched and twisted along the worn pavement. At the heart of the carnival stood a towering structure, draped in tattered banners that read, "The Hall of Reflections. Dare to enter." The entrance was framed by two grinning harlequin statues, their painted eyes seeming to follow passers-by. Beneath the flickering glow of a red neon sign, the wooden doors creaked open, beckoning visitors into the dimly lit interior. A group of 5 friends, Ethan, Claire, Josh, Melissa, and Daniel, stood just outside, gazing up at the attraction. They had spent the evening hopping from one ride to another, but now the night was growing late, and the adrenaline from roller coasters and haunted houses was beginning to wear off. The Hall of Reflection seemed like the perfect way to end the night. A harmless, silly maze of mirrors before heading home. The 5 exchanged glances, smirking at the childishness of the idea. It was just a mirror maze after all. No monsters, no jump scares, just reflections and confusion. As they stepped inside, the door groaned shut behind them. The laughter and music from the carnival faded into silence. The Hall of Reflections was darker than expected. Rows of towering mirrors stretched endlessly in all directions, creating a labyrinth of glass. The dim glow of scattered bulbs cast a ghostly sheen over the surfaces, multiplying the friends' reflections 1,000 times over. The floor was carpeted in plush red velvet, muffling their footsteps. For a moment, they stood in awe, watching as their reflections stared back from every angle. Some mirrors were warped, distorting their faces into grotesque, inhuman shapes. Others were crystal clear, perfect replicas of reality. Then, as they ventured deeper into the maze, something shifted. The reflections were moving and not in sync with them. At first, none of them noticed. The maze was disorienting. Endless corridors of gleaming glass, reflecting their images back at them from every direction. Ethan led the group, running his hand lightly along the cool surface of one of the mirrors as he tried to navigate the twisting pathways. Claire followed closely, her fingers clutching the fabric of his hoodie so she wouldn't get separated. Josh and Melissa walked side by side, glancing around, while Daniel lagged a few steps behind, taking in the strange, shimmering world around them. The deeper they went, the quieter the amusement park outside seemed to become. The distant hum of carnival rides and laughter faded, until all that remained was the sound of their own breathing and the occasional shuffle of feet against the plush red carpet. Then, Claire was the first to notice it. She stopped in her tracks, frowning at the mirror beside her. Something wasn't right. She lifted a hand, pressing her palm against the glass, but her reflection lagged just a fraction of a second behind. It wasn't much, barely perceptible, but enough to make her stomach clench. She turned her head sharply, watching her reflection mimic her, a beat too late. "Guys," she whispered, but the others were still walking ahead, rounding a corner. A chill crawled up her spine. She hurried forward to catch up, her heart pounding. As she turned the corner, she saw the others still moving through the maze, their reflections bouncing endlessly in the glass. But now that she had noticed it, she saw it everywhere. Ethan's reflection lingered a half-second too long when he looked over his shoulder. Josh's image seemed to flicker for just a moment, as though struggling to keep up. Melissa's reflection blinked when she hadn't. Claire's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't normal. Something was wrong with the mirrors. Melissa let out a laugh, but there was something uneasy about it. "This place is seriously messing with my head," she muttered, rubbing her arms as if to ward off a sudden chill. Josh smirked. "Yeah, that's the point, right? Optical illusions, warped reflections. Makes you feel like you're losing it." But Claire shook her head. "No. I mean, really, look at them." They all hesitated, glancing toward the endless reflections. Daniel frowned, stepping closer to one of the mirrors. He raised a hand, waving it slightly. His reflection mimicked him, but just a fraction too late. His brow furrowed, and he did it again. A second's delay. "Okay, that's actually weird," he murmured. Ethan scoffed. "It's just a trick. Some kind of effect to make it creepier. We're in a funhouse, remember?" But even as he spoke, he noticed it too. His reflection stood just a little too still. The way it stared back at him was off. His pulse quickened. As they moved deeper into the maze, the sense of unease grew stronger. The corridors felt longer, the mirrors taller, the reflections stranger. At first it was just the lagging movements. Then, small inconsistencies began to appear. Melissa's reflection tilted its head when she hadn't. Josh's duplicate seemed to smirk when his expression remained neutral. Claire caught her reflection, standing unnaturally still, while she was shifting nervously from foot to foot. And then, Ethan saw it. The moment that made his blood run cold. They were walking past a long stretch of mirrors when he glanced sideways and saw himself staring back. But his reflection wasn't walking. It had stopped. It stood there, frozen in place, staring at him with wide, unblinking eyes. His breath hitched. For a second, he thought he must have imagined it. But then, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, the reflection smiled. A deep, unnatural grin that spread too wide across its face. Ethan stumbled back, slamming into Claire. She yelped, catching herself against the glass. "What the hell?" she snapped. But Ethan didn't respond. He was still staring at his reflection. Only, it was normal again. Perfectly still, perfectly aligned. Had he imagined it? No, he hadn't. The maze felt endless. No matter how many turns they took, how many mirrors they passed, they couldn't find the exit. The hallways twisted and turned in on themselves, reflecting the same images over and over, distorting reality until none of them was sure which way they had come from. Panic crept in. Josh ran ahead, frustrated. "There has to be a way out of here," he muttered. He reached out to push against a mirror, expecting it to be a hidden door or trick panel. The glass was ice cold beneath his hands. Then his reflection blinked. His real eyes were wide open. His reflections were closed. Josh recoiled, his stomach lurching. "Guys," he called out, his voice shaking. "I don't think this is a normal maze." Then the first one disappeared. Daniel was at the back of the group, rubbing his arms and muttering about how cold it had gotten. He trailed slightly behind as they turned another corner. Then, in the span of a single breath, he was gone. Claire turned, expecting to see him behind her. Nothing. Just an endless hallway of mirrors. The others stopped, glancing around. "Danielle," Melissa called, her voice breaking. Silence. No footsteps, no echoes, only their reflections. Too many of them. Their own images multiplied 1,000 times over. But Daniel's wasn't there. He was gone. Panic set in. Melissa ran back the way they had come, but the corridor seemed different now. longer, darker. The reflections stretched, their faces distorting, their bodies twisting into grotesque shapes. "We need to get out of here," Ethan hissed. "Now." They moved faster, practically running, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The mirrors seemed taller now, the corridors narrower, the reflections stranger. And then Josh vanished. One moment he was walking beside Melissa. The next, she turned her head and... gone. His reflection lingered for just a moment too long before fading into darkness. Claire screamed. Ethan grabbed her wrist, yanking her forward. They ran. The hallways twisted, stretched, spiraled into endless corridors of glass and shifting reflections. Their own faces stared back at them, now twisted into unnatural expressions, smiling when they weren't, blinking when their eyes were wide open. Melissa tripped. The moment she hit the ground, she gasped, pushing herself up. But it was too late. The mirrors swallowed her. Ethan and Claire could only watch as her reflection flickered, her real body still on the ground, but her image standing in the mirror, watching them. Then, with a slow, jerking motion, the reflection of Melissa stepped back into the darkness. Her real body collapsed, and when Ethan rushed to her side, she was gone. Only glass remained. The final two ran blindly now, terror clouding their thoughts. The hallways twisted and turned, but the reflections never stopped watching. Then, up ahead, the exit, a single door at the end of the hallway. Ethan grabbed Claire's hand, pulling her toward it. Almost there. Just a few more steps. Then Claire screamed. Ethan turned. She was gone. Only her reflection remained, staring at him from the mirror. But she wasn't moving. Her reflection wasn't trying to escape. It was just smiling. Ethan staggered back, alone, surrounded by thousands of versions of himself, some staring, some smirking, and some reaching out toward the glass. The last thing he saw was his own reflection, tilting its head, whispering something soundless against the glass. Then, darkness, silence, and in the mirror, a new reflection, one that did not belong to him. The carnival lights flickered outside, casting a kaleidoscope of color through the tiny cracks of the hall of reflections. Laughter, distant and distorted, drifted in like the echo of another world. But inside the maze, there was only silence. No sound, no movement, only glass, only them. Ethan was gone, or at least the Ethan that had entered the hall of reflections. In his place, the mirrored world stood still, a frozen, infinite labyrinth of polished surfaces. The reflections that had once mimicked their movements, delayed and unnatural, now stood in perfect stillness, not trapped, waiting. The amusement park outside continued as if nothing had happened. Families bustled past the entrance, oblivious. The neon sign above the doorway continued its soft, rhythmic buzz, its letters flickering. The Hall of Reflections. Dare to enter. From the outside, it was nothing more than an old carnival attraction. But inside something had shifted. Inside, the reflections had changed. The night passed, the crowd thinning as the park's closing hours approached. The workers began shutting down the rides, the bright lights dimming one by one. The music, once cheerful and loud, softened into a distant hum. And yet, inside the mirror maze, the reflections remained. At first, they were still, lifeless. But then, subtly, almost imperceptibly, they moved, not in sync with the world outside, not mimicking the empty corridors. They moved of their own accord. A slow blink, a shifting of fingers, a tilt of the head. The reflections of Ethan Claire, Josh, Melissa, and Daniel were still there, but they were no longer the same. Their eyes, now darker, more hollow, peered out from the depths of the mirror world. Their faces, familiar yet wrong, twisted into something else, something other. They did not look frightened. They looked hungry. The next day, the carnival reopened at sunset. The scent of cotton candy and fried dough filled the air as people streamed in, eager for another night of thrills. The Hall of Reflections stood quietly in the center of it all, its doorway open just a crack, inviting. The first visitors arrived shortly after dark, a group of 3 teenagers, laughing and teasing each other as they stepped inside. The door creaked shut behind them. The mirrors shimmered in the dim light, stretching endlessly in every direction. The teenagers giggled, pressing their hands to the glass, watching their reflections. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then one of them frowned. His reflection had not smiled back. Outside, the carnival music played on. The Ferris wheel turned. The lights sparkled. And within the Hall of Reflections, new shadows stirred in the glass, waiting, watching, ready for the next visitors to arrive.